I'm going to try and start this off and set the tone to keep it quite informal. This study, it's one that it's a fairly small study. It's very qualitative, and I hope that it will just sort of give people some ideas about furthering the discussion. It's part of a larger presentation or a longer presentation, so I've only got 20 minutes. I'm going to whiz through the first few slides so that I can focus more on the discussion part of things. So, and I do want to say right off this top here that this study I took part in as a contracted position. It wasn't as part of my community-based research facilitator role. It was something that I did off the side of my desk in my spare time, sort of in my sleep. And I do want to say that although this is not a community-based research study itself, it employed a lot of community-based research principles in the actual process, in doing the work. So this study is really about it's about resilience, and it's intimate partner violence among gay men. So we studied a group of gay men and asked them about their experiences around intimate partner violence, and it was based on what they perceived to be violence. We didn't define that for them. It was left up to the individual as to whether that violence that they experienced was emotional or physical or a combination of the two. And we really wanted to highlight in this study that it is an issue that doesn't just affect women. This arm is part of a larger national study. The larger study, the national one, is called Prevail. If anybody's interested in some of the other populations that were studied as part of this, they can look that up online. You'd have to Google it. I don't know the website address offhand, but it's Prevail, Prevail. And they studied also other subgroups, African women, other marginalized groups, as well as gay men. Dr. John Oliffe at UBC School of Nursing was the local PI that took on studying the gay men section of this larger study. Sorry, I'm trying to work two things at the same time here. So the research itself is about resilience, and you'll notice when I get to the theme section that it really highlights how people overcame some of the challenges that they've encountered from the time that they first experienced some form of intimate partner violence. And that was really the focus of the study. So the 10 interviews that we did, and we're hoping to do 15, the 10 interviews really focused on how people dealt with the challenges and how it affected them, and then how they ultimately moved on and regained a sense of balance or put their lives back together and moved on from that experience. Some of the themes that we're exploring in this, it was 4 in general, I'm going to cover in just a sec, but just to give you a sense of who is actually in the study. So we did 10 male participants. Of those 10, they were all Vancouver-based. 9 of them were born in Canada. Only 1 was born outside of Canada. The mean age was 47. So you can see it was a bit of an older group of men that were convened for this project. They were taken from 3 different sites: the Positive Living BC, the Dr. Peter Center, and also referrals from Community, which is the GLTBQ center here in Vancouver. 2 of them identified as bisexual. 8 of them considered themselves or self-identified as gay. And education, it was fairly standard. Only 1 had not completed high school. Most of them had completed high school, and 3 of the group hadn't completed post-secondary education. So again, a fairly a standard level of and a good mix of people that were involved in this. And interestingly enough, one of the things that jumped out at me was that 7 of the 10 had actually received some sort of professional help, counseling, support services that they've had specifically gone to for as a result of this intimate violence that they've experienced. Most of them had other health concerns. HIV factored in as well. 7 of the group were HIV positive. Depression, anxiety, addiction, stroke, arthritis, and bruises was another one that was most commonly brought up. So the 4 core themes that I'm going to cover, I'll just go over them. You can see the sort of natural progression here, but recurring negativity about the experience itself and what it did to them mentally and physically, and then finally realizing a way out and working on that particular concept, then bouncing back from the experience itself, and then again proceeding with caution was sort of the final theme that came through. Throughout the study, we did ask a number of questions. It was an hour and a half to 2 hour interview, depending on how chatty the people were in the interviews themselves. But the themes that came out of this were recurring negativity, so that was the first. So their childhood experience and the fact that abusive experience did definitely influence how people felt about things. And then they also talked about some of the ways, their coping mechanisms to deal with that. Often it was with drugs and alcohol. That was, again, very common through the theme. The second, realizing a way out. So when people came to a point where they thought, okay, I can't live like this forever, these were some of the things, the statements that people made. I realized I wasn't alone. And there were many other people in the same place as I was, in emotionally, physically, and mentally. And then people looked also at evaluating their partnership in that intimate partner violence. They looked at who that other person was instead of just looking at themselves. Some of the comments that were made, I've learned too that, this is the same, that you go out to clubs and stuff, you meet other people that have experienced the same thing, and almost a network formed of people that had this kind of experience in a gay relationship. And that led me to believe that there is certainly in the recommendation section the need to do more work on this particular theme. Evaluating, how people felt about them and gender and society norms was another common one, and then evaluating themselves as well. Bouncing back was another common theme, how they left the situation. So when they decided to put this experience behind them, what kind of supports did they access, and what did they do in order to change that particular part of their life? So looking for support outside of themselves, also looking internally, how they actually left the situation, their current view of their ex-partner, who is now an ex-partner, and then again their current view of themselves. So how did that particular aspect change? It was quite interesting to see when people talked about resilience as opposed to just the experience, when they talked about how did they move past it, their demeanor even changed in that conversation. It was quite interesting to see their body language change, their voice tone changed. There was a lot of very interesting parts of that. As soon as they got out of that dark place, even describing it, it really triggered that experience for a lot of people. And it was an interesting, for me as a research assistant in this project, it was an interesting experience to have to actually provide some sort of informal counseling after the interview process as well, just because there were some triggers and people were rattled by the experience of doing this. And obviously we don't want to cause any harm when we're doing research projects, so that was a necessary piece of this. And anybody that's considering to do this work or more of it, I would urge you to make sure that that is a piece that doesn't get forgotten. And proceeding with caution. So the really positive parts of, how people describe themselves. So I became more aware that I deserve way better than what I experienced. I'm more cautious now. I'm able to give advice to others. That was a very common theme. People were very forthcoming about when I asked them, what do you do? And, what do you physically do and what do you actively do to change your life so that you won't fall back into those patterns? And the really most common thing was they said they helped others. They found other people that had a similar experience, and then they talked to them and offered them friendship, support, whatever they felt they needed, and then just worked with them, and that actually helped them as well. And the exciting part, I'm just discovering a whole new self. So putting that version of themselves behind them and moving on and becoming someone else was quite a revelation for a number of the participants. So one of the questions I asked during the interviews was, well, what is your definition of resilience? So the one that came out that was really quite striking was, when I asked this guy, so what do you think resilience is? And he said, it's like Teflon. Yeah, nothing's going to stick. I could navigate through anything and then come out the other side feeling good about myself and my actions. And I thought that was really quite poignant that, that's a great example and a great definition of resilience. So the part that I wanted to spend a bit of time on, and during the course and through all of the questions that were asked of the interviewees, the discussion was about what internal factors within you, the things that you consider to be your values and your thought processes, what kinds of things did you access to get you out of this situation and then become resilient, to really sort of embody that resilience. So things like forgiveness, acceptance, compassion, optimism, humor, being strong-willed, and positive self-talk. A lot of people did physical things as well, walking, exercise, yoga, those types of things. And then external factors, I asked them what kind of things did you access that were outside of yourself, and support groups was probably the number one. Exercise, physiotherapy, Three Bridges, which is a health clinic here in Vancouver, Coast Mental Health for people that had depression and or suicidal thoughts, other community organizations that are available as well, and some, but very few, accessed professional help in terms of like a psychologist or professional health counselors. They preferred to go for more informal. So the recommendations really out of this study are that, and these recommendations come from the participants, not from us, but the participants suggested that one of the things that they could use would be support groups exclusively for men that had experienced intimate partner violence, that they didn't feel comfortable going to the so-called regular support groups and discussing those things because they were perceived as being weak, or, well, you're a guy, how could you stand getting beaten up? Why didn't you defend yourself? Those kinds of perceived comments. So they wanted something specific for the nature of, men that had experienced this. Counseling, again, the support group and the counseling, they preferred to have it either one-on-one or very small groups. The larger support groups didn't really work for them. So counseling, they wanted couples counseling, and not just, again, mainstream or trying to navigate through heterosexual couple counseling or trying to find a gay-friendly counselor or psychologist. That apparently is a difficulty. That was news to me. I thought that it was in our community that was something that there was a lot of information about, but the participants didn't agree with that. They didn't feel that those things are readily available. They needed some guidance in how to access that particular part of things. But they wanted it specifically for gay relationships and not just a heterosexual version, then adapted to meet two gay men or two gay women. And finally, one of the ones that came out a couple of times were specifically a shelter that would be geared towards battered men. The guys did not feel comfortable with accessing or going to a normal shelter. If, the ones that are in the downtown east side, they didn't feel safe there. The ones that are in the downtown parts of Vancouver, where it's predominantly women, they didn't feel that they fit in there. They felt that if they were to access the existing services, they would be questioned about, why are you coming here and don't you have somewhere else to go? But many of the participants said and reiterated that they'd been thrown out of their house at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and they didn't really have anywhere to go from then until the time that, some place opened up for them to go to. So they'd go to a Denny's, or they'd find some 24-hour McDonald's, those types of things, and then just go and sit and wait. So there was definitely a need for some sort of a shelter that would specifically be or geared towards helping men and putting them in touch with resources that are available for them as they come available. That pretty much concludes it. So I do want to thank also, as I mentioned, John Olaf is the local PI here at the UBC School of Nursing. Also, a great assistance who put together the presentation was Christina Hahn and Estefania Santamaria. I love to say that. It makes me sound like I can speak Spanish. She also was very instrumental in the wonderful images that you've seen as a part of this presentation. So thank you very much.